Mavericks did not make the playoffs this year. Today, they're getting ready to open the finals against the Celtics in about half an hour. We'd like to think maybe somehow, some way, the Kings can do something like that. It'll be a lot tougher if they don't have Malik Monk around. What's our general sense now of optimism about whether Malik stays? We're just hoping against hope, right?
I think I was at a 5. I think the other day, so I'm gonna stay a 5 right now.
Okay, that's good enough. That works. Our next guest is the Pistons beat writer for The Athletic, James Edwards III. James, we appreciate your time. I know you've written that you think Malik may be somebody the Pistons target. Why do you think he'd be a good fit for Detroit?
Well, I think first and foremost, a team that won 14 games can use as many good NBA players as possible. So we can start there. Secondly, though, I do think he addresses a lot of needs that they have, right? Like, obviously, a team that wins 14 games has a lot of needs, but three-point shooting, the ability to create shots off the dribble. I don't think he'll be uber expensive relative to how much cap space the Pistons have and the limitations the Kings have, and the biggest in terms of the biggest contract they can offer him. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a starting role here for Malik Monk. Mm-hmm. It just seems like opportunity there for him, and obviously that Michigan tax is probably a little bit better than that California tax when it comes to those paychecks too.
Yeah. James, when you look at what you guys have, where does Malik fit in? Is he your point guard, your off guard, just a guard with Cade? How does that work? Do you think?
Yeah, I think he could be the off guard with Cade. Obviously, assuming Monty Williams is the coach next year, they like using Cade in that lead ball handler role. I think most coaches that would coach Cade would probably prefer him in that role, just a bigger guard. But to have another guy next to him who can take on some of those ball handling duties, but also can go off screens and be a good kick out option, I think that's very important. And obviously, they have Jaden Ivey there now, who is obviously super talented and super promising, but streaky shooter, just still has a long way to go, and I think he's been thrown into the fire early on and could benefit from maybe a more diminished role, being so young and even learning behind somebody like Malik Monk too.
Talking to James L. Edwards III from The Athletic, he's a Pistons beat writer, and he wrote, I think it was yesterday, that he thinks Malik Monk might be a good fit for the Pistons. And James, a moment ago, you mentioned the finances. Let's look at that. And as you alluded to, the Kings are limited. They could most they can offer is like $17.9 a year. Yeah. And you said, he wouldn't be too expensive for the Pistons. What do you think the Pistons would be willing to offer? What do you think Malik can reasonably get from the Pistons or some other team here?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, I think it really just depends on the market for him, right? Obviously, I think the floor is what the Kings can offer, which I think is 4 for $78, which I think comes out to like 19.5 a year or something like that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're Detroit, like you go to 23, that's $4 more million.
Yes.
Plus, he saves money on the tax difference between California and Michigan. And then you factor in the Pistons have $65 million in cap space. So for the Pistons, that's a really good NBA player, and you still have another I'm bad at math, $32 million to play with after that. So I think they could go up to 23 and 24 and be comfortable there if push came to shove, depending on how bad they really would want them.
And they would be, if they wanted to, they'd be in position to, if there's other suitors, they could offer more than that, right?
Certainly. I don't think they'll go to a situation where you see Malik making like 27, 28 to come to Detroit. That feels kind of high. But given that the Pistons can go above what the Kings can offer, you wonder how many other teams value Malik. Do some teams see him as a starter? Do they see him as a high-end, obviously, bench player? He's performed in both roles. I think that probably is the difference in terms of how teams view him. And I don't know if teams will want to go to $20 million for a guy that they want to come off the bench, but there are guys out there, like, for example, like Gary Harris, who's also an unrestricted free agent, fits a lot of the kind of the holes the Pistons need, three-point shooting, defense, 3-and-D wing, right, who might not be as expensive as Malik Monk. So not only could, maybe the Pistons pivot if the price gets too high, but other teams could pivot, and there leaves the Pistons with Malik Monk for a decent price, too.
Right.
Yeah, James, we were having a conversation, me and Kevin here, Whitey here, about, the Pistons and where they stand. And actually like some of their young talent, whether it's I'm a Jaden Ivey fan. I like Jalen Durant. I like Cade. How far are the Pistons away from not necessarily being a contender? I'm not saying that, but just being respectable, 30 wins, making that leap. You mentioned 13 wins this year. I think their talent is better than their record indicates. What say you?
I agree. I don't think they were 14 win bad. It's hard to be 14 win bad in the NBA, but somehow they did it. And I mean, even the year before when Dwayne Casey's last year, they only had Cade for 12 games and still managed to win 17. So I think they had to look really hard at themselves in the mirror and figure out what happened. I think this year, I agree. I think they do have talented young players, but I also would push back and say, I don't know if some of them are ready for the roles that they've been pushed into. You look at a guy like Jaden Ivey, who, again, super talented and has all the potential, but streaky shooter, struggles with turnovers, not a great defender. Jalen Durant, monster rebounder, right, but really struggles defensively. So it depends. With Trajan Langdon here, we're still waiting to talk to him and kind of learn about his vision, but I think they could make some waves if they're able to go and get the type of like Malik Monks of the world or Nick Claxton's of the world. Just add like 2 or 3 legitimate NBA players to build around Cade, who I'm not sure how closely people paid attention because the Pistons were so bad, but Cade's numbers were identical to like Paolo Banchero's numbers, and he did it in a much worse situation with a team that's not really catered to his strengths. So you got a guy to build around. Now I think the important thing is getting some veterans in there who like have proven skill sets, who know who they are, who know what they do. I just think right now they've done too much experimenting and allowed the young guys to try to play through mistakes, and it's cost them in the win-loss column.
Pistons beat writer James L. Edwards III is with us. He's a beat writer for The Athletic. We've been talking a lot in a roundabout way about Monty Williams because, Coach Brown just signed his deal, and for weeks we've been looking at coaches and how much money they're getting now, and obviously Monty's name comes up a lot. I want to ask you, if I may, a two-parter. One, I know you're focused on the Pistons, but what did you think of Mike Brown? 8.5 per year for 3 with some bonuses potentially. And then also what kind of pressure, what are the expectations for Monty Williams coming up this season?
Yeah, I think Mike Brown, I'm glad he got that deal. I was a little worried that with all due respect, that the Kings were going to Kings there and be a little bit, little too.
Come on, man.
Welcome to the club, right? Welcome to the club.
Yeah, I mean, I said with all due respect, I thought the Kings were going to Kings there and be a little too big for their britches because they've had some success lately. But that's the guy that's helped them get some success and change the culture. And I'm glad they took care of him and didn't penny pinch over, what was it, just like an extra $2 million or something like that, $3 million, whatever. So I'm glad they got that done. And then in terms of money, yeah, like I think right now they're with the new president coming in, he's in the process of evaluating everything. Obviously they moved on from Troy Weaver last week. They're in the process of evaluating the coaching staff. So I think if Monty does come back, there's obviously going to be big expectations for him to maybe make some big changes, whether that's with his staff or his approach in terms of how he uses players or things like that. Like I certainly think there is going to be an expectation for things to be altered if he does come back, simply because whatever happened last year clearly didn't work.
Hey, James, how do you think the Pistons are viewing this draft? I think they have the number 5 pick. Are they looking at this as an all-star kind of player they can pick up, you think? Do you think that's available there in this draft? Or what do you think about, just how deep and what kind of caliber player is available in this draft?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say where the Pistons' mind is just because Trajan just got here and still trying to obviously learn him. But if you look at the history of the Pelicans, they really targeted long, rangy wings, right? Like you look at Herb Jones, you look at Trey Murphy, you look at Dyson Daniels. So this draft has those guys. I don't think that there's a lot of question mark with those guys. Like you look at Buzelis, you look at Cody Williams, you look at the likes of like even Zachary Ricochet, who could go top 2 or top 3. I think there are questions there. And in terms of if they could find a star, I mean, I think this is the type of draft where you look back and like, look, the best player was found picks 5 through 15, right? I think a lot of these guys are grouped together. I'm just very curious to know how fast Trajan would like to accelerate this rebuild. Like maybe do they use the number 5 pick in a trade to bring in somebody more proven, right? Because I know there's a lot of talk about this draft being weak, but because it's weak, maybe there's a rival team who likes somebody who thinks the best player in the draft could be had at 5, and that 5th pick isn't cost nearly as much as the 1st pick and 2nd pick, especially in a draft where you're iffy on the prospects. So they have a lot of options they can do. I know the Pistons and their fans or at least their fans are obviously and rightfully kind of worried about where the organization is going. But you look, they got $65 million in cap space. They got a pick they can trade. They have some interesting young players. Like they can accelerate this a little bit sooner than it may look to the outsiders who just see that the team won 14 wins and could be in some trouble.
James, thanks very much for your time. I wanted to, before we let you go, clarify one thing, because I hadn't realized. I know that Pistons have a new regime. There may be some issues based on what you just said as to whether Monty comes back. Now, couldn't that potentially that could affect a decision by a guy like Malik, right? I know we're speculating a lot here, but Malik, even if the Pistons have interest, he would be interested in who is going to be the coach if it weren't Monty, right? That could be part of this decision for him.
Yeah, it certainly could be. You never know.
Yeah.
Relationships that these players have with coaches, so you never know, certainly. I'd imagine that the Pistons have a decision one way or the other within the next week or two. But, yeah, certainly. If I were a player, I would put that into consideration.
Gotcha. I hadn't considered that. Thank you. We appreciate it, James. Thanks very much for your time. We hope to talk to you again soon.
Definitely. Hope you guys have a good weekend.
All right, James.
Yeah. Boy, the Pistons can offer a lot of money. We can offer 23 and still have more left.
Yeah, and I didn't know Monty. There was any question about whether he was coming back or not.
I was like, wait, what?
Yeah, that's interesting. That definitely could play a factor in that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So Malik's staying, right?
Right. Yesterday, weren't you at like a .03?
Yes.
Where you at now? Like a .05 or something like?
Well, I don't know. It's going to be Detroit, but when he talks about how much money they could offer. A .01.
Oh, yep. Right. You heard them dollars figures. You're like, oh my God.
It just has a chance to make so much more money somewhere.
So
and
much
everything
more
comes back to no matter where it is. It's like, well, the taxes are better.
Taxes, that's a real thing. We all see those W-2s or whatever it is. And no, you're right. You're talking, 4 million, 5 million a year more just in salary. Over 4 years, you're talking close to $20 million. And then the tax implications, too. It's a big draw.
We'll come right back with our final pre-finals look at the